There we go. Welcome back. This is the second part of our interview with Bob and Joyce Bernard on January 5th, 2021. Finding some interesting things out on my birthday. They came up, sweet of them. We just went to lunch at downtown Buckner. Exciting things.
Very good.
It was good. The first half of the interview, we talked about your childhood and your parents. Is there anything we want to wrap up before we move after, let's say we're about age 12. Is there anything that we haven't mentioned from your parents and grandparents?
I had a brother that was 2 years younger than I was, and a sister 7 years younger than I. And there was such an age difference that I don't remember her growing up. And I feel bad about that. I've tried to, over the years, try to remember,
But you're close to him now.
Oh, yes, we're very close, always have been. Yeah. The growing up years, I just can't remember her. I remember her when we were in high school and your dad and I were dating, and she always had this, little sister.
Yeah, she's like, what's going on?
You remember that too.
Well, that's a good segue to, we should start at that point, like how you guys met in your high school years.
Yeah.
Go ahead. She was going to a different high school called Philly High School. It was a town of Philly. And it was where all the kids from the Zion Lutheran Church, most of them went to Philly because they were in the Philly school district. And I went to Holmesville High School. We were, Philly and Holmesville were always big competitors. Back in those days, we only had basketball and baseball. And big competitors between the two schools. She was going there and she decided, well, that's part of your story to tell.
I always felt the presence of God very close to me. And he guided me. He did things to me that I've been writing down as I remember them. But he did not want me at Philly.
Philly school was, they were rough and rowdy.
Very much.
Boys and girls both.
Really?
Always.
What was the reputation of Holmesville High?
Very
I
wonderful.
don't know.
That's
You don't
where
know?
God.
Good, clean-cut kids, I guess.
That's where God placed me. I lived with my grandparents, and in my junior year in September, I started school at Holmesville. And of course, my cousins all went to
She had
Holmesville.
lots of cousins that went to school there. And so that was kind of natural. Plus her grandma and grandpa Busboom lived in that school district, Holmesville. And
Those are your dad's parents?
My mom's parents.
Your mom's parents.
Yes.
this, she had a cousin who rode the bus, of course, to school, Holmesville. And that bus went right by her grandparents' house, so it was easy for her just to live at grandma's house and attend school in Holmesville. Her dad had to go down and enroll her down there, and then because she was going to a school outside of their school district, there was fees that they had to pay to accommodate that. And it was September of 1957. I was starting my junior year in high school. And I was glad that school was back in session because I liked school. I enjoyed learning. I learned all my life. And so that was like on a Monday. We had school there at Holmesville a day or two the first week of September. And the first Monday of September is always Labor Day, or back then it was.
It is.
And it was recognized that the day off was that day. and the state fair in Nebraska would start that week. So it was a Tuesday, would have been probably the first Tuesday in September of '57. And I was going to school, like I said, walking up, we always walked to school and home. And I was just walking up the sidewalk to the schoolhouse, and there was several girls that I, of course, gone to school with most of the time, and some of them all the way from kindergarten. And they were kind of in a group there just talking before school started. They had already got off the school bus and were just waiting for the first session. And there was a new girl in the group. She was pretty. She had longer blonde hair. She wore a ponytail. And her clothes were just as neat and clean as a whistle. And of course, riding on school buses back then, most of the kids just getting done with the morning chores, and they'd be coming on the school bus with some of the cow manure and chicken feed and dust and stuff like that all over their clothes. And her clothes were nice and clean. She wore bobby socks with the cuffs turned down, and then a swirl kind of put in the cuff.
Wow, you remember a lot of details.
Oh yeah. And most of the girls back then wore saddle shoes, the white with black saddle shoes. They still make them, I think.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But no, she didn't have those on. She was wearing penny loafers. Had bright, brand new pennies in them, too. So anyway, I thought she was pretty, but I wasn't about to look at them because I didn't want anybody to see me look at her and say, "Hey, you like her? You like her?" No, I didn't want to be. Didn't want any of that. So I went on in, and the boys always gathered down in the locker room before the first period. And I just went in and where all the boys were, and I just sat down and didn't say a word about her. And I figured that, the guys would be talking about her before too long. And somebody started talking and asked who she was. Larry Hulse, a classmate of mine, turned out to be her cousin. Of course, he knew all about her. He gave her name. I caught Joyce, and I didn't catch the last name. But I didn't say anything because I figured I'd be finding that out anyway. And that's the first time I saw her. I was favorably impressed, yes.
When did you first see him? Oh, go ahead.
First time I saw him, we used to have roller skating parties, the junior and senior class. And I hadn't seen him. I wasn't interested in guys. That was the furthest thing from my mind because I went to school with some pretty rough guys. And I learned to run as fast as I could after school to get home.
Wow.
Yeah. And sometimes I'd cut through the pastures in order to keep
Was
away.
that bad? They would chase you?
Anyway, we went to a roller skating party, and Frances, a cousin of mine who's a year below me, and Eileen, a year above me. And we were always very close. And the three of us had been skating. I wasn't paying attention to the guys. I wasn't interested. And Frances was sitting on this side of me. It was the last skate. And Eileen was sitting on my right-hand side. And Frances goes, "Oh, here comes Bob. He's going to ask me to skate." And all of a sudden, Eileen goes, "It's Joyce." And I saw his hand come out.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And I took his hand, and he pulled me up. And we were inseparable for the next 2 years.
So that was that.
It was beautiful.
So let's talk about that car. 46, 47.
1949 Chevrolet Club Coupe, two-door coupe. Back in those days, a lot of people referred to them as a business coupe because a lot of salesmen drove them because they were smaller, but they had a trunk for them to carry all their sales brochures and stuff in, and it was gray. The other kids in school, other guys, they teased us about it. They called it the Gray Thud. Because it was just a 6-cylinder stick shift, of course, back then.
Jim got to always use the newer car he was dating my cousin Frances then. And so he always got the new. But
Why? Because he's older?
Probably. But that was okay. I didn't care. I was with your dad. That's all that mattered to me.
So where did you go in the Thud? Did you have drive-ins?
There was a drive-in theater, the Crest.
The Crest Drive-In.
Yeah.
Do you remember a movie that you saw?
Oh yes, the first movie we saw together was The Ten Commandments.
Which version?
And the one with
Cecil B.
Charleston
DeMille.
Heston. Yeah. That was our first movie together, and that was at a theater downtown Beatrice.
Oh, that wasn't a drive-in then?
No, that wasn't the drive-in.
The drive-in was in Beatrice too, or Wymore?
Beatrice.
Did you ever go on dates to Wymore?
No, well, we may have, but
I don't ever remember.
there wasn't much in Wymore. There was a theater in Wymore. I forget what the name of it was. One theater. Because when we were younger, we used to sneak into it in the summertime to watch war movies.
I know people used to go to the theater just to cool off because there wasn't air conditioning.
Yeah.
Is that the case? Did you
Our
ever?
parents didn't have air conditioning, so we weren't used to having it cool.
Yeah, but the theaters had AC, right?
Yeah, but I think we only ever went to 2 indoor movies. It was The Ten Commandments and then Jailhouse Rock with Elvis Presley. Those were the only 2.
So what did your parents think of each other? What did your parents think of Bob, and what did?
Oh, they loved him. They absolutely loved him.
What did your parents think of? What did your parents think of?
Well, of course, back then, all the farmers knew each other. So they knew who Gerhardt Karstens was. But they didn't really, they may have known that you were their daughter.
Yeah.
But that's
But
about all.
we lived in the Zion community, and your dad lived in the Brethren community.
It's about 9 miles apart, which is a long distance back
in
then.
those days. Yeah.
Yeah, my dad was a seed corn dealer for DeKalb hybrids. And of course, through that, he knew a lot of the farmers on a first name basis all around.
And my dad was the Archer oil dealer, so they naturally knew each other.
And then one summer, I don't know what the year was, about 56 or 50, 55, 56, but George Karstens built a big Quonset metal building for a shop building for his tractors and farm equipment. And I remember Dad had talked about it and was aware that he had a nice new building up there. And those farmers visited among themselves about who paid how much for what. Because our old machine shed was just wood poles and galvanized iron on the sides and the roof. We kept the combines. We had 2 combines we kept in there. Yes, some of the other farm equipment in parts of that building. But he had talked about building a new one. He never did until after my brother and I both had left the farm, and he was back to having to farm everything by himself. That's when he started making things a little more convenient.
Because he didn't have you guys like to
Yeah.
help.
Yeah.
Well, I thought Jim did help him though.
But Jim did, yeah, he continued to help him. And eventually Jim started working, farming full time with him in order so that he could, his dad got too old to work, he could go ahead and take over all the farming, which he did.
Mm-hmm.
But
So-
Jim worked on the gas line.
He worked for a gas, he worked for a pipeline company for a number of years
Really?
called Platte Pipeline, and they pumped crude oil from Wyoming into Wood River, Illinois, all across Nebraska and Missouri and into Illinois. And he worked on the maintenance crew with them and helped,
For how long?
2 or 3 years.
Mm.
And then after that, well, he worked for the gas utility there in Beatrice, the ones that distributed natural gas throughout the town. And he did service work with them. He worked with the crew that, they'd go out and repair gas stoves and furnaces and stuff, and commercial cooking equipment, restaurants and things. And after that is when he got into farming full time.
What about you? Why did you decide to go into engineering and go that?
Well, because I always enjoyed learning things. And
He did. He loved learning.
back
That's
then,
what I loved about him.
a lot of the men were always, I'd hear the men talking about, you're never going to make much working with your back. You got to learn something and work with your brain if you want to, make a good living. And engineering was natural because I was always interested in how things worked. I always felt like the guys that worked on it and installed and maintained the equipment like that knew more about it than the so-called engineer that just designed the systems. And it was just my desire to learn more. Even today, I feel like there are people that know more things. The guys that know the most are the ones that do the work. And as an engineer all my life, I was always with those work. And
You were hands-on.
I was the engineer, hands-on, out doing things, yes. And I was never a big shiny desk man, going to the Chamber of Commerce meetings and stuff like that. I didn't interest me. As far as personally, I just wanted to be able to make enough to make a living for my family. Money was never an issue, a desire on my part.
Good.
He was the best there was.
The biggest compliments I got was from some contractors, good working men, that told me that they appreciated I'd rather work on one of my jobs that I had designed as an engineer than some of the other so-called big wheel engineers.
I got so many compliments about your dad.
So you had a good clientele base.
Pretty good clientele base, and I knew a lot of people from the hands-on work. We were at some store there in Springfield one day. I walked in the door and right by the checkout stand, and there was a man there and his wife, and I heard him give his name to the checkout girl. I forget what they were buying, and I recalled the name from service days. So I introduced myself to him, and he remembered me, and he was telling his wife, but some of the things comments he made, that just make you feel good, that somebody remembers those things about you. And I'd rather be complimented by the guys that do the work than the banker and the mayor down there. You know, that didn't interest me.
Yeah.
And my heart just swelled with pride, the compliments
Yeah.
that they would give him, or the things they'd come over and tell me it was something special that he had done about a job.
Randy Long, became a good friend.
Yeah.
Well, because you took it seriously, and
and I had done the work, and they could recognize that.
And he never put himself above anybody else, which so many businessmen do.
I always felt they know something I don't know.
That's a good, humble attitude to have. Yeah.
Yes.
Enough about me. Go on to how we met.
No.
She was, like I said, in school we had basketball, of course, every winter. And baseball, we played baseball in the fall and then again in the spring.
And the first year of football.
Well, the junior year, I won a ladder course in basketball. That year we had track, and baseball and track. And we had a big tournament every winter in Beatrice, and it's for the whole county. Teams would come in from the various schools, and they'd be, matched up for play. I called them Udecas. I didn't know what the name stood for. The Udecas tournament. And I think that year we won it when we were juniors.
Yeah.
I don't remember about seniors, but
I had a picture for a long time.
She was a cheerleader and I was the player.
You like the iconic high school couple,
Back in those days, that was something. Yeah. I don't know if they still do that or not.
Oh yeah, they used. Well, yeah, I think so. I think they still do.
Big time. To so many kids that stay, particularly those small schools. To me, so many kids, their high school years are their best years.
A lot of people don't get past that.
Which seems strange to me.
Yeah, I mean, you can have good years, but there's good years
all
throughout your life. Yeah. So in your vocation, let's talk about the family, the Cliff Note family you worked for.
Oh yeah, they were an awesome.
Because they probably said a lot of good things about you too.
I thought the world and all of them, and they thought the world and all of me. And
Cliff Hilligus?
Yeah. And Mary.
Do they still use Cliff's Notes?
They don't. They use no. A little bit. I think they're still printing them, but now the kids have access. They use Google and Google Drive, and you don't need Cliff Notes or it's on audio. They do listen to a version of it that way.
They always invited me to all of their Christmas parties with all of their people from overseas and in the United States.
Were they in Lincoln?
In Lincoln. And they would have me sit at the head table with them.
Aww.
They treated me beautiful, and all the families I worked for, I was so blessed for the people.
Well, they were blessed to have you because you probably worked, as we know, really hard.
You have to work hard when you work for people.
Not everybody has that attitude, but
I know, but we do. We were raised that way. Our parents were hard workers, and
well, the years we grew up in were the best years, really.
We were.
See, we grew up in the 40s and the 50s.
Happy days. That's what I think of.
Yes, and it was. We didn't hear of burglaries. We didn't hear of murder. You would once in a while in Omaha hear of a murder, but around there was no crime. It was.
What was it like?
So beautiful.
Post-war, because that's totally post-war, and they're your grandchildren will watch this and they won't know that environment. What was that like when the guys came home? What was the country like post-war?
Well, it was still quite patriotic.
Yes.
That's always been a good word to us. We don't understand why patriotism is looked down on today.
And the flag.
But yeah, the veterans coming home.
Did he treat the veterans well? Because I know that Vietnam, that was an issue. They spat on veterans.
Yes, it was horrible how they were treated.
But World War II, how'd they treat?
No, they were heroes.
They were heroes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
They came back with everybody was so happy when they came home.
And there was housing set up in Lincoln and around any college town, university town. There was housing set up very similar to wartime housing.
Mm-hmm.
It was nothing fancy and comfortable and all that, but it was just livable. And most of that was for the veterans.
Yes.
That's when the GI Bill came along so that the veterans could receive some financial assistance and family assistance as they were going to college and to school. And most of them were studying career stuff that would be able that they could apply, in a good, well-paying job. That's when the idea of a home in the suburbs was
Ideal.
prevalent everywhere. What was it? Levittown in New York was big with all the tract housing going up, and they did them there by the thousands. Around out in the Midwest like this, it would have been a few hundred maybe at the most, but tract housing became quite prevalent. And of course, in the Midwest, where they were trying to copy what was being done on either coast.
Still, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you're considered the baby boomer generation, which means they're the babies of the war vets came back, got married, had children.
We were just prior to the baby boomers, yes.
But I'm sure, did you have any friends your age that had a dad that was off to war?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember any fathers passing away of friends in the war?
I still see the cemetery of Zion, all the young men that didn't make it home.
Is there any particular, did you have a close friend that lost a dad? Is there any stories there that you can remember?
No, most of the ones I had had not lost their dad, but their dads were just veterans.
Mm-hmm.
And Eleanor Ideas is one.
Yeah,
And Ferricks, Larry Ferricks and that family, their dad came back. And the stories we heard about Ferricks was that in the service that he made quite a bit of money. He liked to play cards. And of course, they gambled a lot in the service, and he would play cards, and if he won a big jackpot, he was known for sticking that money back and saving it. And so he came home with I call it a grub stake, with which he could buy a farm and set himself up.
That's smart.
Yeah, and but yeah, they were recognized veterans, and they were well liked and appreciated.
Yes, they were.
A kid right there in Holmesville that was younger than my dad, but still was quite a bit older than my brother and I. His name was George Pence, and he enlisted in the United States Army. Back then it was called the Army Air Force, and he became a pilot. He flew Mitchell B-25 bombers, or twin-engine medium-range bomber. Had a good reputation in the Air Force, and he was good enough that they made him. Well, he got to a colonel rank of a colonel, which is a pretty good rank for a farm boy from a little corner of Nebraska. And they made him a flight instructor, and he was worked out of Roswell, New Mexico. Now he took his basic training and flight training at an air base in Liberal, Kansas. That's clear out in the very southwest corner of Kansas, just a little ways north of across the Oklahoma Panhandle of Texas. And today there is at that same air base, there is an air museum out there, and it's worth a drive to go out there to Liberal, Kansas and see that air museum.
We went there a couple of years ago.
Because they do have a B-25 bomber. That's what was based there during the war years on display. And it's amazing. It's quite a machine. Those days, those were war machines. They were not made for creature comfort. You know, like in the cockpit, the pilot and co-pilot were really pretty well jammed in there together, and you had to know what the other one was doing all the time, because you didn't want your arms to get tangled up, and you didn't want to interrupt the pilot and what he was doing by having your arm in the wrong place at the wrong time. But it was interesting that old George became a flight instructor there.
He came back to Nebraska, right? I remember hearing that name.
Yeah, he did come back after the war in probably about 46, I imagine. And when they came back into town into Holmesville, he was driving an old Chevy, two-door Chevy sedan that had his Lieutenant Colonel George Pence written on the door, like they did back in those days. And his wife became the postmistress. There was a post office there in Holmesville.
I remember that.
And
I remember talking to her, I think, when I was little.
I'm sure you did, yes. She was there for years and years. And because she had been a nurse in the Army, why she had kind of a preference to obtain that job, that position as postmistress.
She is a vet.
And that post office was run by a man by the name of Ott. It's either OTT or OUGHT, and I think he used either one. Ott Jones. And in addition to his postmaster duties, he ran like a little small drugstore or pharmacy out of the same building. And he was a barber.
Wow.
So he did have a barber shop there in the town and right in the post office.
That's about all Holmesville had, wasn't it?
Holmesville had that post office with the barber shop. Across the street to the west at one time had been a hotel.
A haunted hotel.
Because there was a street that went on down to the railroad track where the depot would have sat back years ago. So as people came into town, there was a horse-drawn taxi wagon that would take the people and their luggage up a block up the hill to that hotel. And it was just a one floor and then a second floor. I don't know how many rooms, may have had 3 or 4, probably is all. And who would have stayed there would have been the traveling salesman back in those days that traveled the territory. There was a lumber yard then, and their supplies came in on the train, and the cars, lumber yard and coal cars full of coal were set on the side track there. And then the lumber yard would always hire young boys, teenage boys, high school type boys back then, to offload lumber or coal into wagons, and it was pulled back up the hill by the horses, where it would be offloaded from the wagons into the lumber bins or the coal bins. And that's where the people around there that their house was heated with coal would buy their coal there at the lumber yard. And let's see, there was, at one time, there was a doctor, I think, that kind of worked a little bit out of the first floor of the hotel. There was, of course, a powerhouse. There was a mill down there. A dam had been built on the Blue River. And they had a race where the water coming downstream would go into this race and into the mill, so it could turn a water turbine to grind corn. They could have their corn or their wheat ground into flour there.
So at Holmesville's heyday, what was the population? 50?
No, in the heyday, it probably would have been 150.
Oh.
It was, at one time, they had tried to make it the county seat,
Oh.
but it lost out. In fact, it was laid all out, platted and everything to have lots of streets and street names and everything. But they lost out in the race. The politicians selected the town of Beatrice. The idea was that this county seat needs to be in the center of the county, so it was no more than a 1 day or a day and a half buggy ride or horse ride from anywhere in the county into the county seat in order to do county business.
But Beatrice is bigger too, right? Even back then.
Well, it was a little bit bigger and it grew bigger too after it became the county seat, yes. Oh, and let's see, there were 2 stores. One was Reimer's, was just like a general store today. They did have a gas pump out front where you could buy gas, but that was seated with like an old potbelly stove sitting along the west wall. And on cold winter days, why some of the farmers would come into town and go to the post office or what to take on some kind of business, and then they'd go up to the Reimer's store and they'd sit there with the other old timers and talk like old men do, keep the fire going. And then clear at the back of the store, which would have been the north end, they sold like hardware supplies there to a certain extent, a small amount. And then the basement down below, they had barrels of rope. Rope back then was wound up inside barrels, and that's the way it was shipped around the country. They'd set their barrel of rope down there and feed the rope up through a hole in the floor, tie a knot in it so it wouldn't fall back down. And then they knew that hole was 30 or 40 feet from the front door, so if he wanted 80 foot of rope, they could pull it out and take 2 lengths to the front door and chop it.
What was the price of rope
that
day?
I don't know, probably just a few cents a foot, 2 or 3 cents a foot, I'm going to guess. Cucumbers were probably, 2 for a nickel, stuff like that.
Did you go down in that basement ever?
No, never doing well. Just was down one time just to see the rope barrels, yeah. But they always had an outside entrance.
Did Grandma send you there to pick up milk or something ever?
Well, sometimes, yeah. Or she'd want a Tony home permanent.
Well, they did have everything.
Oh, well, yeah, it was modern.
Is that the biggest store in town?
That was the bigger one. There was a second smaller store. And just groceries, things you might need. Bread and milk and cereal and coffee. Yeah, most of the people, I'd mentioned cucumbers. Most of the people raised their own anyway. But yeah, they'd sell a few, or they were selling local produce too. Other people would bring them in and they'd sell them for them. And they just kept books so that if somebody came in to go get a pound of coffee and a Tony home permanent, and just tell them to charge it. Tell Burton, was the store, guy who run the store. Tell Burton just to charge it. He'd write it down in his book under J. Bernard's book.
Then, like, what, once a month did Grandpa go
once
pay his bill?
Once a month or so, yeah. the farmers would stop in, settle
See
up.
what their wife was buying.
Yeah, and see what,
It wasn't a
see if the
lot.
kids were charging candy.
Oh.
Yeah, the kids got in trouble then.
Or buying ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
Because you could get chocolate or vanilla. That was
You
it.
had your choice, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, soda
You could
pop
get
was a nickel.
Uh-huh.
Did they have a soda fountain? They probably weren't that
Well,
big.
no, it was a Coke cooler over there. You had to reach in,
Oh.
or some of them you had to drop your nickel in the machine in order to unlock it to where it would, you could get one out.
Did you go to one of the soda fountains?
Littler bottles.
I remember.
Yeah, the soda fountain was back in Beatrice, the county seat, was at the Rexall store, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
that's right.
Did you ever go there?
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Because you go in those stores, Heston's, the dime store, had a soda fountain, and they cooked hamburgers in there.
But you
Oh,
love
that-
that.
That smells so good.
What was the name of that store?
Heston's.
Heston's.
And they had candy in where they could reach in
Bulk.
and bulk candy. They
Oh.
had little M&Ms, and I could go in. My mom would give me a dime, and I would come out with a bag.
That's a lot for a dime.
Yeah, it would last me a couple of weeks.
She'd buy a dime's worth of M&M's.
M&Ms.
I like the peanuts. I was one of the dime's worth of peanuts. You got a pretty nice sack full.
Mhm.
That was
But
what
we'd
they
get,
had.
if we got a quarter apiece, because we'd been working hard on the farm, and you did work hard.
Yes.
And so if we went to town, if the folks went to town, we went along, and we got, at the end of the week, we got a quarter apiece to spend. And I'd say, well, here's a quarter, but don't spend it all on your gut. I mean, on something to eat. You know?
Yeah. And did you?
Well, it was so tempting. The hamburger might have been 15 cents there at the counter. So,
Yeah. And
Well, when we were
a shake, a malt.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
when we were dating, we went to Rancho after a movie and get a little, they would call them Rancho burgers. They weren't a real hamburger. They
There was the loose ground beef.
Yeah.
and some French fries, and what was that, a quarter?
Uh-huh.
We could go out on a date to a movie and that, and it was what, $2, $3?
No, $1, yeah.
And gas, to pay gas. That,
If you had $2 for a weekend, well, you were set.
That's a big weekend.
Spend $1 on gas,
yes.
and $1 to get you 2 tickets to the movie show, and enough to share a hamburger and something afterwards. Yeah.
And a drink.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like great times. Like, I think probably the feeling of like, oh, our country, okay, we won the war, you know, all is good, you know, it seems like families are pretty stable and,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Plus the
I went to
technology advance, you know, was coming out, the new cars after the war, you know, the design of them was better. And mechanically, they were better, the engines were better and stuff.
I wanted to say one thing about the war. The kids had an uncle who was in World War II, World War II. And I got to get him to talk about it one time, and it was only for a few minutes. But they never got to change their shoes and socks. And they could never sleep because they were always afraid of getting bayoneted by the Japanese. And they would sleep with their backs up against the tree. And
This
I always
was,
said
he was on
that-
Guadalcanal, big fights early in the war, the
mm,
South Pacific.
and a military officer came to Ted and Grenada's place. That was his mom and dad, and told him they didn't know where their son was, that he was missing in action. And some months later, the military came again. Their son was in a hospital. I think it was in New York, but I'm not for sure. I'm not for sure which hospital. But He was there for a long time, and he finally got to come home. But he was never without pain, and he was never without nightmares. And he died when he was in his 70s.
He lived a long time, though.
Yeah. But he never would tell me, Howard just can't get peace.
Yeah, I bet. So what was the one thing that you said he would talk about? Was it his socks and shoes?
Yeah.
That was the only
Socks
thing?
and shoes, that his feet were bad. And having to stand up against the tree and the rain and the mud and the constant firing of the, he never got over it. Never got over it.
I don't know how any combat soldier could.
Yeah.
Thing I do remember, well, we both remember wartime radio broadcasts.
Yeah.
Oh.
This is Edward R. Murrow, London calling. He was reporting from London. And he'd fill you in on
Every day?
every evening on the news.
Yeah.
And he'd fill you in on the bombing of London. And the German planes would come over and bomb London indiscriminately.
How did your parents react when you were sitting there with them? When you guys were listening to this stuff?
Well, they were just kind of
Just like in shock.
mhm.
You never heard it, at least my folks never talked about it.
Really?
But they would have the radio, and I was just little. But I can remember looking at my mom and dad's face. I didn't really know what was going on, but I knew it was something that was not good.
Mm-hmm.
It was.
Yeah, so that was, well, there were just several of those broadcasts that I just remember bits and pieces of. Our house, we had a very small house. It was, well, from the back door, it was like a split level entry. You went down about 6 steps to the basement, and you went up about 4 steps to the kitchen, and then there was a living room, or a dining room, and a living room, and a bedroom. Of course, that was the folks' bedroom. One small closet off that bedroom. And there was a little room between the bedroom and the kitchen that when we finally got indoor plumbing and water, that became, it was called a bathroom, just a restroom, just a lavatory and a water closet. Or in the basement is where they had a shower was put on against the wall because there was a floor drain right there. When the house was built, probably 20 years before that, I don't know why they put the floor drain other than just in case the basement ever got water in it, it had a way to drain out. And that drain just went out and went over, it was just opened up into the greater ditch on the west side of the house.
Oh.
So we originally didn't have any septic tank or anything like that. So when the plumbing was put in, well, they had to install a septic tank and pipe all the waste out through the septic tank. And anyway, what was I forget where I was going with that.
You're talking about
Just a small house, and so a lot of our time, my brother and I we'd spent just in the basement, and I remember being in the basement and hearing the radio upstairs. So that's some of those broadcasts. I remember some of them, I forget who the announcer was, broadcasting from the Pacific Theater, talking about how the monsoon season comes up and everything's wet. You can't get dry anywhere or can't get away from it. And then I heard about, back then I didn't know what it was, but the aroma, the sweet aroma, which just became sickening over there, was from gardenias. They just grow wild over there. They kind of take over the whole landscape. And that's where a lot of the PT boats were based in little inlets around the islands and stuff, inlets off the sea, and that's where their bases were established. And then after the war, while a lot of these guys, when they did come back, they were able to get the VFWs, Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion were two of the big veterans associations. A lot of those guys were able to get either an Army surplus tank, which Beatrice had one down in Chautauqua Park, or airplanes that they could set up, just for display. I always thought that was pretty cool to have those things that close. And I remember the parades that they had, one parade of veterans coming back. It would have been probably 46 or 47, and probably on VE Day, Victory in Europe Day.
What day is that? What is VE?
That's in August, I think, of every year. And VJ Day, Victory in Japan, is August. VE Day is in March, April, May, somewhere in there. Victory in Europe.
They don't teach kids any of this in school no more. They don't even teach kids about the founding of our country.
Yeah, but those were the best years because things were positive. It was a positive attitude throughout the country. Nobody
said a kind word about anyone.
You could teach the kids and train them on with what am I trying to say about kid stories, Mother Goose stories.
Yes.
Yeah, why have those been?
We still read them.
It's not like we used to have.
There's so many stories now, so many books that the selections.
But all these Mother Goose, they all had a moral to them.
Like Aesop's fables.
Same way with the Western television shows in the 50s. They all had a moral to the story. Yeah,
they try to do that in the movies. So speaking of radio and television, so you had radios growing up, and then when did TV?
I was a senior in high school.
So that was
59.
Oh, 59.
58 or 59, yeah.
But since you were little, they had radios, like in your house?
Radios, yeah.
So what, then a family entertainment, did you actually sit around a radio, like, and listen to it?
You worked until sundown.
So
nobody. You were always working. By the time you got through with working, because when we kids got home from school, we had to go help with the milking, getting the eggs.
So after dinner, people didn't sit around a radio like they show on shows listening to.
Not the farm people.
Not much like that, no.
The town people, yes, but the farm people, the farmers were the hardest workers there were.
We didn't sit down to supper until usually around 8 o'clock.
Oh my gosh.
And supper was a pretty good meal.
Yes.
Oh, I thought dinner was the bigger meal.
Well, it is the biggest, but supper was pretty good because you were hungry.
There would be a big breakfast. There would be a lunch about 10 o'clock. There'd be a big dinner at 12. And when all the farmers would get together and help each other, and when they would come to our place, and every farm wife did this, she would set out a huge spread of food for the farmers. There would be a whole table full of farm men and their young sons and that, and cooked a great big meal for them. And then in the afternoon at 3 o'clock, you get another lunch put together to take out to them to eat. And then about 8 o'clock, 8:30, you were all exhausted. You'd come in.
When the sun finally went down in the summer.
By the time you got cleaned up, it'd be dirty every afternoon, from the dust in the field.
Yeah.
So by the time you got cleaned up and sat down to eat, it was getting late. Quite often you'd get up from the supper table and go to bed.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Of course, today I'm sure they'd look down on that. Well, you can't do that. But
our parents would be accused of child abuse.
Oh, yes.
So we'll just like wrap it up. Like, think about your life and what what's you kind of mentioned that those are the best times of your life, but anything stand out that anything else that was impactful on you?
When your dad and I got back together,
Mm-hmm.
that was awesome.
And that was how many years ago? Because
that was in, well, I'll never forget that Saturday morning. I had just gotten up and I was standing in front of the dresser looking in the mirror. And God says, Joyce, it's time. And I knew exactly what he meant. And 5 weeks later, we were married.
because your anniversary is just a few days ago.
Mm-hmm.
How many years?
33, 34, 87. So,
Yeah.
so it'll be 33 done. Isn't that right?
Hmm.
Something like that.
I don't pay enough attention to the numbers.
That's still a long time for a second marriage.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful.
So, any advice to your grandkids, great grandkids, great grandkids that you want to share? Like anything that you would do over? Any advice of just life advice?
Don't get angry. It is just futile. It doesn't do you any good. Just turn it over to the Lord and forget about it. And he'll take care of it better than anyone else can or you yourself can.
Is that something you learned early on? Did you used to get angry, or have you always been new?
I've never been. To me, my mom and dad were both so easygoing and so gentle and so kind, and my grandparents and aunts and uncles. You never, but people outside in the community, they could get so angry, and I didn't understand anger. I did not understand it.
Mm-hmm.
I got scared.
Yeah, people that are angry are pretty scary.
But
Well, I think the biggest change that I see now is selfishness.
yes,
Mm.
And I see that everywhere. The most dangerous place in the world to drive is in parking lots. It's serious. People are crowding and I want that parking place close to the door.
Mm-hmm.
And then all they don't look out for me, here I come. And I just see that everywhere. I hear about, what do they call that, Black Friday sales?
Yeah,
And,
not so much this year, but yeah.
mm-hmm.
and whether you're black, white, yellow, pink, whatever color, we're all the same inside.
Mm-hmm.
It is
We
just
all bleed
our
red.
skin
That's
that's
right.
a different color.
Mm-hmm.
So why is it everybody can't just get along?
Mm-hmm.
I have never understood that.
Mm-hmm.
I've always known black people. I've always gotten along with them ever since I had moved to California.
Of course, that's one good thing, being raised on the prairie farm ground in Nebraska. There was nothing about
Racism.
Yeah.
But there wasn't very much
exist.
diversity either, right?
Most of the diversity we had there was people were refugees from Europe, Western Europe, either from East Germany, Prussia, up Latvia, up those small countries up that coast of Western Russia. We had a number of those. Those families were brought in, most of them through church organizations. And so that was as much diversity as we had.
There were some blacks that lived in Beatrice.
And there were some black farmers that had been, part of the pioneers. And
Jake. He does that to the cats.
Oh.
He loves the cats, but then he plays with them. And he like shows who's boss.
Are you the boss? Are you the boss? Yes.
So those things are just foreign to us.
Yeah. We don't understand this hatred that's in the world today.
Yeah, now when I was
Yeah, it's
in
going
high
to change. I don't
school,
understand it either.
there were some blacks that come down. Most of them were from Lincoln and Omaha schools up there. And the year, well, it was senior year, I was on the track team in the spring. And we went to one of the state quarterfinals or something like that for track. It was up in Crete, Nebraska, small town closer to Lincoln. And I didn't compete with this young man, but I got to watch him run. His name was Gale Sayers. He was a freshman at Omaha North. And then I got to see him run. He ran a 100-yard dash in 9 and some tenths of a second. I'd never seen anybody run so fast as that kid. They shoot the gun to start the sprint. And when they shot the gun, he was like 4 steps ahead of everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, he was fast. So I like to tell the story that I was in a track meet with Gale Sayers.
Yeah.
I wasn't in the same event, but that's beside the point.
You have another story about Jackie Robinson. You should talk about that.
Jackie Robinson was one of my favorite ball players when I was just a 10-year-old kid.
Your dad has a letter for him.
I know. He was he in the Negro League at that time?
He played for the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Yes.
And when they moved to Los Angeles, I was so disappointed. But anyway, yeah, so I had a letter. I'd written him a letter. I'd asked him if I could be a bat boy for the Brooklyn Dodgers, and he had to write me back, or he had somebody else write me back. That was probably impossible because I had to have somebody that lived there in Brooklyn. But anyway,
You have another baseball story here locally.
well,
Kansas
yeah,
City.
I do. The first big league ball games that I saw was in Kansas City when I first went down there. The fall of '59, they still played at Kansas City Municipal Stadium down at.
Still standing.
And yeah, well, it's like a memorial now, I think. And on Brooklyn, 18th, 19th, and Brooklyn, something like that. Anyway, they had their regular stadium there behind home plate and kind of up both baselines. And then further out at the end of that were the outfield bleachers where you sat on wooden planks out in the sun. And I was there one day when Mickey Mantle and the Yankees were there, and Mickey Mantle was at the home plate. And he hit a home run from that home plate that flew way out over the ballpark, clear out of the stadium. You saw it disappear, and then a little bit later you saw it bounce up because it landed in the middle of Brooklyn Avenue and bounced up so high that you could see it again.
Wow.
And so I got to see him hit that. And then in those days, the Kansas City Athletics, the A's, were kind of known as a farm team for the New York Yankees, because a lot of the good players of the Kansas City A's went on to the Yankee team. And Roger Maris played for the A's, I think just one summer, and then the Yankees bought him from them. And he was, 1961. That's when he got his home run title, when he hit 61 home runs and he erased Babe Ruth's 60. He and his family lived in Independence, Missouri. In Manor Oaks, I think, was the subdivision.
It's good memory, Dad.
I could probably drive you by the house if.
It's a nice area.
If you could
Yes.
find it again.
Yeah.
I bet he could.
Anyway, I was working in Independence that year with the gas company, and I like to go with the servicemen on service calls because that's how I learned how the machines work right. And what was his name? A serviceman. I'll think of that. Anyway, he came by my little office there and he said, "Come on, go with me. We got to go on a service call." Well, okay. So we got in his service truck and we were driving out away from the plant. And he still hadn't told me where we were going, so I finally asked him. He said, "We're going to Roger Maris's house." "Oh, we are?" I said, "Yeah, he's got 2 gas air conditioners out there.
Gas air conditioner.
Mhm. One of them not heating right." "Oh, okay, that sounds fine to me." So we got there and worked on that unit, got it working. Then Roger Maris was home. This was February or so, before spring training in Florida. Roger was there and he invited us to come up to the kitchen and said his wife was baking homemade cookies. Wanted to know if we wanted some homemade cookies. I think they were chocolate chip. Yeah, so we sat at the kitchen table with Roger Maris eating chocolate chip cookies that his wife was making because the kids were in school and she wanted cookies when they got out of school. So we were sitting there eating chocolate chip cookies and drinking milk and talking to Roger Maris.
Wow. Did you talk about baseball? What did you talk about?
Well, sure, we talked about baseball. Couldn't find out. He was from Fargo, North Dakota.
Wow.
And that he had played American Legion baseball when he was in high school. Well, so had I.
Oh.
So we had a little bit something in common, you know. I don't just let people know, yeah, I could have played with Roger Maris.
You could have. Almost.
So that was, and then there was, Gail Sayers. He went on to University of Kansas and became a good football player and became a professional running back with Chicago Bears. So I've got a good football story, track story, couple of baseball stories.
Any basketball stories?
No, nothing on basketball unless I can make one up real quick. And nothing but the truth. I might embellish something a little bit, but it's all true.
Right.
But TV had a show on Roger Maris number of years ago back now, about the Roger Maris story. And they advertised as a TV movie. They advertised it that his wife was going to play herself in the movie, and she did. So when they had the movie, she was played in the movie, and it was his wife. I know because she baked me chocolate chip cookies.
And tell her about down in the basement.
He took us down the basement. See, back then everybody had a nice living room, and the family room was normally in the basement. And you usually had a pool table and all that kind of stuff in the basement. So he took us down the basement, and you went down the steps from the living room down to the bottom of the steps. The landing was like a mosaic tile of the New York Yankees insignia, the big red circle with the hat and the
I wonder if it's still there. Huh.
So it had been put there, special for him, of course. And you went down and you turned left into the main room, and on your right against the east wall was a trophy case with his trophies. Well, in his trophy case was the original. Now I'm going to lose it.
No, you'll be fine.
He was an outfielder. The trophy for an outfielder, major league. That just impressed me that I didn't see a trophy. I saw the trophy.
So there's only one trophy? Like it travels like a World Series?
No, it was just the one that had been presented to him that year.
That's neat. Wow.
So that's as close to big league athletics as I got.
Bigger than me.
Yeah. Well, any departing words that you want to say overall about your life or anything you want to
The most
advise?
important thing, just keep learning.
Mhm.
There's something to learn every day, and you'll learn it from the most inconspicuous person that you come across.
You told me that's what Grandpa would say, is that something about you're always learning or always ask questions. If you don't know, ask questions. What was that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't recall, no.
He said it doesn't hurt to ask questions because you always want to keep learning. Something had to do with his seed business. I don't know.
My mom and dad always said, don't stay angry. Let things go.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who just hang on.
Their whole life,
Yeah.
hang on to that.
Yeah, bring you down.
Oh, they're so
That's an ice machine.
it makes a lot of noise.
All right. Well, thank you.
Oh,
Should say hello to your. You might have grandchildren watching this in several years, and so
we love all of you. Always have, always will.
even those that aren't born yet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Golden Glove, that was a trophy he won.
Golden
The
Glove.
Golden Glove.
I thought that was a
That's
boxing.
No, that was baseball.
Really?
Yeah.
We'll have to Google
For
that.
fielding, has a good
Fielder,
Oh,
field player, Golden
I
Glove.
did not know that.
Yeah,
I learned something today.
we did.
With your dad, I learn new things all the time.
Yeah, he's just full of information, isn't he? Because he's always learning.
He never brags on himself, which I think is
all the
just
world's
so
knowledge is in books.
Mhm.
Still is, in spite of the internet
Yeah.
and
Well-
that cloud thing up there.
It's not there. But yeah, they're putting books on the cloud, so they're always accessible, which is actually is great because you can pull up your phone. You know, what was that quote from this book, or what was chapter 13 from? You know, Mice Against Mice and Men, and you pull it right up, and it's amazing. I love that technology.
Well, I don't know how to use that kind of stuff.
We like to just sit and read to each other. That's
Yeah,
what we
your
enjoy
grandkids may
doing.
not even know what books are. They go in the
That's
future.
okay.
Because they'll be electronic, but it's essentially information, knowledge, and
I'd rather read a book than try to read it off of a cell phone.
yeah, right.
We're old fashioned, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I ran bookstores for years. I'm the same way. Like a book is a friend. You know, I always think of its tangible friend, and it's always your friend, and you can't get that with your cell phone or a computer or whatever. You know, it's.
And if the power goes out,
You still, you just need a candle. Yeah, a book and a candle. That's all you need. Yep.
And just think, the old people. I had an aunt and uncle that even after I graduated from high school, Beverly, and Darlene and them, they still had lanterns that they took out to go to the bathroom, to go milk cows early in the morning, light up their house. That was all they had.
It worked for them.
Huh? Yeah. Yeah.
All right, let's wrap up.
Oh, okay.
We'll get a cake. So this is 2021. Let's have a good year and a good future. And bye.
Yes, bye-bye.
Thank you for watching.